Nature tends to have a blueprint for what life looks like. So the further we get away from living foods or wet foods, the less likely it is that those foods are going to be compatible with our biology. This is probably the most under-discussed aspect of health, which is the skill of listening to our own bodies. Our ancestors evolved in a particular environment for millions of years, and it's only relatively recently that we've deviated from this pattern of life. The world of health information is filled with fear and panic right now over all the toxins in our food, in our environment, and overcomplicated arguments for this food or that exercise protocol. This is not to say that these topics are not important to discuss and that I will never take the time to dig into those details in the future. But today I want to provide you guys with some frameworks that will help you get the ball rolling if you're overwhelmed by all the information coming at you today through the lens of nutrition. One of the primary goals with the content I make is to help people like you learn more about your bodies and health in general, and stimulate that critical thinking about how we live our lives, but also to simplify as much as possible to give you digestible information and practical tools so that you can move forward towards better health. We have busy and complicated lives, so the more that we can reduce unnecessary stress and complications, the better it will be. In this video, I'm going to provide you guys with some simple frameworks to use when considering your nutrition practices. This is not going to be a video on carnivore versus keto or vegetarianism. I'm not going to be diving into any specific details like that, but I want to give you some tools so that you can filter the information that you're getting online about these things and other aspects of health so that you can make the best decisions to decide what works best for you. If you follow my content, it's important to understand that the base framework I use to view how our bodies should function is through the lens of evolution and how our ancestors adapted to the environment that they lived in, and thus the biological blueprint that they passed down to us. Our ancestors evolved in a particular environment for millions of years, and it's only relatively recently that we've deviated from this pattern of life. And because the modern world is so different than the environment that our ancestors grew up in, we need to be very particular about the choices that we make on how we spend our time and what we put in our bodies. So understanding that our ancestors lived outside, they followed the natural rhythms of light and dark that the sun provided. They hunted and gathered for food that was available to them. They didn't have the option of processed foods or packaged foods. So a great filter to run the information through that you hear online about nutrition is how likely is it that my ancestors would have ate this back when they lived in the wild? From a nutrition standpoint, this essentially eliminates all processing of food except for cooking. Now, this is not to say that we only need to eat things that meet this criteria of no processing, but if what we're eating falls outside of this criteria, then that means we should be asking more questions about how suitable it will be for our bodies. And as always, and with everything that we will talk about in this video, most things lie on a spectrum. And so when we're discussing things like this, understand that these things are not black and white. We are always going to have to take each piece of information and understand how it fits in the context of our lives. So next, I want to discuss the skill of listening to our own bodies and understanding how it is that the foods you're eating affect you specifically. This is probably the most under-discussed aspect of health, which is the skill of listening to our own bodies. And I understand why it's under-discussed. This is not a black and white topic, and it can become quite complicated. But I'm going to try to lay out a few things that you can think about when you're trying to consider how does the food that I'm eating affect my body, and just how do the decisions I'm making in general for my lifestyle affect my body. It's also important to understand that we should not just believe our bodies no matter what. Just because we feel something does not mean that our bodies require something. For example, just because I feel like eating a bowl of ice cream does not mean that my body is deficient in a massive dose of sugar. After all, listening to our bodies is a skill, and it takes time to refine and master this skill. The most simple way that we can pay attention to how our body responds to food is to pay attention to how our stomach area, how our gut feels after eating a meal. So you want to be looking out for feelings of overfullness, bloating, cramping, or this general feeling that you want to push your stomach out, or that it's difficult to engage your deep abdomen. So if you think of pulling your belly button back towards your spine, if after a meal you feel like when you do that, your body wants to push it right back out, these are all signs that there might be irritation or inflammation going on in the gut from the meal that you've eaten. You want to pay attention if foods stimulate your digestive system in undesirable ways like diarrhea or constipation. Or maybe a particular meal leads to a big energy crash, maybe 45 minutes to an hour after that meal. These are all signs that the foods that you're eating are having negative effects on your digestive system and your metabolic health overall. So after a meal, we should not feel full. We should actually just not feel hungry anymore. Our bellies should feel like we really haven't eaten anything at all, and we definitely should not be experiencing that post-meal energy crash. So the next framework we can consider is a little bit of a strange one, but we want to consider whether we're eating wet foods or dry foods. Now, this is a large generalization, I understand, but if you actually look at the individual food items, it's a pretty good filtering mechanism to distinguish between whole foods and processed foods. So what I mean by wet foods is foods with high water content. You're talking about meat, fruit, and vegetables. Dry foods, on the other hand, are going to be your grain products, your breads, your crackers, and other dry processed snack foods. So dry foods have the capacity to actually pull water from our bodies into our digestive system, leaving us more likely to be dehydrated and have digestive issues. On top of that, many dry foods, such as grains containing gluten, for example, have separate negative side effects on our digestive system, like inflammation, leaky gut, and autoimmune issues. Dry foods also tend to be higher in carbohydrates and lower in protein. So from a macronutrient priority perspective, they're not that important anyways. Nature tends to have a blueprint for what life looks like. And if we look around the animal kingdom, life fuels off life. And what is the most common component of life? Water. So the further we get away from living foods or wet foods, the less likely it is that those foods are going to be compatible with our biology. So here are a few basic questions that package what we've been discussing so far into a quick checklist you can ask yourself when preparing a meal. So am I eating whole foods? Think one ingredient foods. Am I prioritizing protein? Let's say for the sake of this video, at least 30 grams per meal. Am I avoiding inflammatory ingredients? This is grains, processed sugar, and industrial seed oils. Do any of these food ingredients cause me bloating, lethargy, or other digestive issues? And obviously, if we have specific food allergies or known food intolerances, then we have to avoid those as well. If you can be confident that you are addressing these concerns when making a meal, then you can be confident that you are making pretty good decisions when it comes to your nutrition practices. If not, this is a sign that maybe some changes to your nutrition practices will have to be made. There will be a time where there is a time where some of us will have to discuss more complexities about nutrition when these simple rules just aren't getting us where we need to be. So if someone has an autoimmune issue or is really struggling to lose weight, these might be some times where we want to dig a little bit deeper. For example, there's a lot of people now that are having great results with autoimmune issues, doing more radical styles of nutrition habits like carnivore or keto, or people with type 2 diabetes may need to completely eliminate carbohydrates for a period of time. I'm not saying that these are prescriptions for these things. I just want to lay out some examples of times where making it simple is not going to be addressing our needs. It is important with conversations like this to understand that context matters. And even within your own life, context will change. For example, how we digest our food is going to depend on our stress levels or whether we're eating a meal before or after we exercise. So always keep an open mind. Be ready to adjust your plan and get involved in the process of learning about how our bodies function and how your body works specifically. So we've discussed viewing our health and nutrition specifically through the lens of how our ancestors evolved and what that means for how our biological needs are often misaligned with the current environment we live in. This is one of the reasons it's so important for us to pay attention to the choices that we're making for how we live our life and what we put in our bodies. we discussed prioritizing wet foods over dry foods. We walked through learning to listen to how our bodies feel, specifically when it comes to how our bodies feel after eating a meal. And lastly, I gave you guys a quick checklist to give you a few questions to ask when preparing a meal to help take the complexity out of deciding what it is you should and shouldn't eat. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. And if you found value in this video and other videos on this channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps small channels like this grow so that we can get this information out to other people who also might find benefit from it.